He was a man of sorrows, acquainted with our hearts, wounded and mistreated. He was cursed and set apart. So when you're trapped and troubled by heartaches of your own, look to the man of sorrows, for you are not alone. You are not alone no matter what you face. You are not alone. You are covered by His grace. He trusted God with his life. You can trust Him with your own. Turn your eyes to Jesus, for you are not alone. He was a man of courage who knew his Father's will, and just like a lamb to slaughter, he climbed up that lonely hill. So when the road that you travel is steep and still unknown, just follow in His footsteps, for you are not alone. You are not alone, no matter what you face. You are not alone. You are covered by His grace. He trusted God with his life, and you can trust Him with your own. Turn your eyes to Jesus. You are not alone. A friend of mine wrote those words to a song, goodness, way back in the 80s. It's been one of my favorites ever since. You are not alone. And how we need that promise in our lives every single day. I'm excited about this new series of sermons. You know, we've just come out of a pretty heavy series on the spiritual armor of God in Ephesians. And now we're going to be looking at a theme of God's faithfulness. And I think as we look at that, so many times we judge the faithfulness of God on our own faithfulness, or what the faithfulness of others have been. And no matter what, no matter how faithful a person has been, human faithfulness is always imperfect. And God's faithfulness is always perfect. Just as His love is perfect to us, His faithfulness is perfect to us. And so we want to look at this in a little different light. We're not looking at our faithfulness in this series. And we're looking at the faithfulness of God. Next Sunday, I want to talk about the faithfulness of God. He will provide. He's the great provider. He's the Jehovah Jireh, great provider. We're going to look at He is faithful to forgive. We're not always, but He is. Josh is going to bring a message about how He is faithful even when we doubt, which we will. God doesn't. He's still faithful. And today I want to start with that topic of God is faithful. You are not alone. You are not alone. But have you ever felt alone? Obviously, right? All of us have had times in our lives where we have felt like we've been alone. Maybe it's just actual physical isolation. As we've visited this past week with a couple of, I hate to even call them this, our shut-ins, because Lori Shamp is the last thing in the world she doesn't want to be called a shut-in. But she's been shut in because of her surgery. Not only does she not have mobility right now, but doctors have said you need to stay healthy. You have this next surgery coming up. You don't need to be out among people. So she's kind of in, and she said, I'm kind of going crazy. Stand hours. Well, we spent just over half an hour just kind of getting caught up on what's going on in the life of the church. He didn't even know Nicole was pregnant, Josh. And I felt bad about that because how many times I've been there. Really was so excited to know about Josh and Nicole's pregnancy. And then the one thing that really excited Stan was I said, and Stan, this is really cool that every Sunday when I preach now, I've got 2 rows of young adult people right up front. Man, Stan just lit up, He needed caught up because he's isolated somewhat. He isn't always here. And there are other people that we get to see that physically they're isolated and they become feeling like they're alone. But there are other ways that we feel alone too. We're going to be looking at those in this message today. But be encouraged. We're going to look at some ways in which we can feel loneliness. We're going to look at good news. There's good news to this. And then kind of some practical plans of what we can do in our lives and in the lives of others that are around us. So we're going to jump into this today. God is faithful, and you are not alone. We've all felt alone at times. We've all had that loneliness in our lives, and it's a psychological thing. Here's an article written by Dr. Lisa Firestone, and I really like I believe what she says, because I believe we can take what she says psychologically and actually put that into a spiritual sense as well. She says, when we start feeling isolated, we may have thoughts of not belonging or of feeling rejected by others. What we overlook, however, is that when we are alone, we often are in the company of the worst enemy, the one within ourselves. An isolated space is the perfect breeding ground for negative, self-critical thoughts. And there's actually a clinical term for this. The thought patterns make up what is called the critical inner voice. Everyone has one, the critical inner voice. And it's an enemy that leads to self-destructive thoughts, processes, and behavior. This inner critic feeds into our feelings of isolation, encouraging us to avoid others and remain in that lonely place. It's a clinical thing. And what I'd ask you this morning is, there's probably been times in your life that you've heard that critical inner voice that's been your enemy within attacking you during these times where you have felt isolated, where you have felt maybe like you just did not belong, maybe even rejected by others, maybe even rejected by God, and you have felt totally, completely alone. And that critical inner voice has been speaking into you. I'm going to ask today that you would pray with me that we would no longer listen to the critical inner voice within our hearts and minds, but that we would listen to another voice that is speaking to us today. And that is the voice of the power of the Holy Spirit of God. That's the truth. That's the voice that we need to be listening to today in our lives. And so today I pray that you will be able to put aside this critical inner voice and be able to hear what God is saying to you through the power of the Holy Spirit. Well, first of all, let's look at reasons why we feel alone. Why do we feel alone? What is it that is happening in our lives? And I'll look at 4 different little areas in which we all feel alone at times. And the first would be this. There's social loneliness. This one has absolutely nothing to do with number of people in your life. This is a time when people, they're always around people. Socially, they have a lot of people around them. Okay? And so they're still feeling alone. Please don't get me wrong. There's something in our lives that I believe causes social loneliness, and I absolutely love this thing, and I believe it's important, and that's technology. Technology has caused us to feel very socially alone. When I was in seminary, I was in a very unique cohort group of people. The group was almost split right in half. There were guys, ladies and men that were over the age of 40 who had been in ministry some 15, 20 years or even longer. And that was about half of us. And that was my group. And then there was a group of young men and women who had just graduated with their undergrad degree who started right into seminary. Conversations were very different within those groups. And one day, it was me, Dwight, which Dwight was about my age, and he kind of had the same kind of thinking I did. And then one guy, Joel. Joel's a youth pastor up in Michigan, great guy, he became a great friend. And Joel was the young guy. He had just graduated. His undergrad went right into seminary. And Joel was on his computer, and he said, "Hey, wow, I just cleared the 4,000 mark." And I'm thinking, on a game? He goes, "No, I've got 4,000 friends on Facebook." And so Dwight said, wonder what I got. So he looks it up. Yeah, I got 40 friends on Facebook, And I just kind of sitting back, to listen to this conversation. And then another, even younger guy, he was actually still in undergrad. And he was walking by the door where we were talking, and he heard that. And he said, "Facebook? Who's still on Facebook?" And so he rips out his phone, and this will date the time frame a little bit, but Twitter had just kind of come out. And so he said, "I got 2,000 friends on Twitter, followers on Twitter." Well, Joel didn't want to be outdone, So he knew, well, I've got a Twitter account too. And he looked up and he goes, "Oh, I've got 2 followers. And I could see this euphoria that was over him when he had these, 4,000 friends, and all the rest of us just 40 or less. But when somebody else had outdone him, he immediately felt insignificant. He felt very alone. So then I said, yeah, but out of all those people, how many of them do you have what I would call refrigerator rights with? Well, what do you mean by that? Well, I have some people in this church, that you invite me to your home, I could walk in, I would feel totally and completely comfortable and would have no issue whatsoever of getting up and opening your refrigerator and getting something to drink out of it. Because we're friends, we're close, we have that kind of relationship. And you can do the same thing in my home. Because we have refrigerator rights. That's a little bit closer relationship. And so I said, how many of those people do you really, really know who would really have your back if you needed them? Who would really be there if you felt lonely? They would be willing to be there and be with you. I don't know. And again, I love technology. I have social media. I keep up with my friends, my family. I keep up with other pastors and their churches. Our church uses Facebook as a tool to be an outreach program. Today, there are people watching us on our Facebook Live feed that they can see this church service and if they're not able to be here. I'm a gadget guy. I love technology. But please get in your mind that it is only a tool. I love woodworking. I can take my hammer and I can build a table, or I can go out and tear and destroy pallets to get them all broken up. It's a tool. I can get an ambulance driver and put them in a vehicle and they can save a life. Or I can put a drunk driver in that same vehicle who might take a life. Those are tools. How are we using these tools? And a lot of times, technology with our social environment, and I remember one pastor said, it's funny that we call it social media because there's absolutely nothing social about it. It's almost an escape from society because I can say whatever I want to say and do whatever I want to do. But it's also a place where you can feel very, very alone. Very alone. So we can have social loneliness. Okay? Next place that we can have that kind of loneliness is in emotional loneliness. These are people that wear great masks. Everything looks great on the outside. I'm doing wonderful. Nothing wrong. And yet deep down inside, they're just dying.